Miriam, the incredible journey of the prophetess. Have you ever stopped to think about the power of a woman of faith? In a world where leadership was predominantly male, there emerges a figure who defies all expectations. Miriam, the sister of Moses, was much more than a simple character in the story of the Exodus. She was a prophetess, a leader, and her journey teaches us that faith can take us to unimaginable places. But not all of her decisions were right. And there lies the controversy. How could someone with so much faith have failed? What can this incredible woman teach us about leadership, humility, and even forgiveness after her mistakes? Get ready to learn a story of highs and lows, of failures and redemptions that will make you question your own decisions and, who knows, change the way you look at life. Miriam's journey is surprising, full of challenges and victories, and has much to teach us today. Shall we dive into her story? Miriam's childhood and the rescue of Moses. From a young age, Miriam showed signs of unshakable faith and leadership that stood out even amidst the oppression faced by the Hebrew people in Egypt. She was just a child, but she knew she had a fundamental role to play when her mother, Jochebed, made the difficult decision to place her younger brother, Moses, in a basket in the waters of the Nile. In this story, we see a courageous girl who, instead of fleeing, followed the basket from a distance, ensuring her brother's safe rescue. In our own lives, how often are we called to take courageous actions early on, to protect those we love, even in situations of great danger? Miriam's leadership began to take shape there, on the riverbank, when she took the initiative to suggest an unexpected solution to Pharaoh's daughter, that Moses be nursed by his own mother, without the princess knowing who she really was. A strategy from someone who wasn't afraid to act, even though she was young and vulnerable. Thus, Miriam teaches us that, even in the face of adversity, wisdom and humility are essential tools to turn an impossible situation into something positive. Leaders, from an early age, learn to recognize opportunities hidden within difficulties. This story, though ancient, offers lessons that can be applied in our everyday lives. How many times do we find ourselves faced with challenges where it seems like our hands are tied? And yet, it is in these moments that faith pushes us to make decisions, no matter how risky they may seem. In the rescue of Moses, we see that fear and insecurity can be overcome when we place our trust in something greater. Miriam trusted that her plan would work, and that changed the course of Israel's history. In the same way, we are called to trust and act in faith in the most difficult situations. Now, it's important to reflect. What if Miriam had hesitated? What if she had decided not to act, leaving her brother's fate to unfold without intervention? The story would be very different. It's this same sense that we must carry when faced with difficult decisions. That moment of hesitation can change the course of our personal story, and even those around us. Miriam knew there was something greater at stake, and that should serve as inspiration for us. In moments of uncertainty, may we not lack faith, leadership, humility, obedience, and, above all, forgiveness when we falter. Miriam as a prophetess and leader among Hebrew women. Over the years, Miriam evolved from a courageous young girl into a true leader among her people. She didn't just accompany Moses and Aaron on their journey, but played a fundamental role as a prophetess and spiritual guide for the Hebrew women. This title wasn't given to her by chance. Her unshakable faith and ability to lead with wisdom made her a figure of respect and inspiration. Miriam understood that to lead required more than words. She needed to be a living example of humility and obedience to divine principles. How often in our lives do we see that true leadership is not imposed, but earned through actions? What makes Miriam's leadership so remarkable is that she understood the importance of each person within the community, especially the women. In a patriarchal society, Miriam stood out as one of the few women with spiritual authority. She taught with patience, leading not just with words, but with actions that inspired trust. Leaders like Miriam show us that, regardless of our social context or the expectations others place upon us, there is always space to demonstrate leadership and faith. The humility she displayed, despite her prominent position, reinforces the idea that the greatest leaders are those who serve others. Being a prophetess required more than divine inspiration. Miriam had a deep connection with God and her people. She conveyed messages that strengthened the faith of Hebrew women, especially in moments of crisis and doubt. Like in her youth, her leadership wasn't based on imposition but on a soft, steady influence that guided people towards obedience and trust in God. Isn't that how great spiritual leaders always act? They don't force belief but nurture faith in each heart, showing that true strength comes from within. Today, how often do we have to lead like this in our families or groups? Even with all this influence and spiritual power, Miriam never forgot forgiveness, an essential lesson she learned and passed on in her teachings. While leading the women, she knew that faith, leadership, humility, obedience, and forgiveness go hand in hand. She taught that to be a true leader, one must forgive others' mistakes and also one's own. Forgiveness, to her, was more than an isolated act. It was a continuous demonstration of strength and character. When we talk about leading with faith, we're talking about leading with a heart that knows how to forgive, because without forgiveness, there is no true leadership. Miriam's song after crossing the Red Sea. After the grand crossing of the Red Sea, the Hebrew people experienced an unprecedented liberation. And who led the song of celebration for this victory? Miriam. Her voice rose not only as an echo of gratitude, but as a symbol of faith and hope. Miriam's song was more than words sung to a melody. It was an act of leadership, where she expressed what the entire people felt: gratitude for liberation. She took the tambourine, and along with the other women, praised God. Through this act, Miriam showed once again that female leadership is powerful and inspiring, and that faith manifested in song has the power to transform hearts. Miriam's song was a pivotal moment in the Exodus journey. It was the voice of a woman that echoed the people's liberation, something that, for the time, was extraordinary. She didn't just sing, but led the women to follow their faith with conviction, reinforcing the essential role of feminine spirituality. In moments of victory, faith is strengthened through gratitude, and Miriam knew this. This episode reminds us that in our own journeys, we need to celebrate both small and large victories, not just with words, but with actions that demonstrate our leadership, our faith, and our recognition of the divine presence in our lives. Beyond being an expression of faith, Miriam's song also reinforced a sense of unity among the Hebrew people. Music has the power to connect, and Miriam used that power to strengthen the bonds between her people. This teaches us that even in the greatest victories, it is important not to forget those around us. True leadership is not solitary. It's about inspiring and uniting others. And Miriam, as a spiritual leader, understood this perfectly. Leaders like her show us that faith, leadership, and humility are expressed in simple things, like a song, which resonates through generations. And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video. Miriam's relationship with Moses and Aaron. The relationship between Miriam, Moses, and Aaron was always marked by complicity and shared leadership, where each played their role in the divine plan. As the older sister, Miriam had already protected Moses when he was just a baby in the Nile waters. Years later, the three became pillars in the liberation of the Hebrew people. Miriam served as a prophetess, Moses was the leader chosen by God, and Aaron was the priest. It was a dynamic of mutual respect, where faith and leadership were shared. And how many times in our own families or circles of friends do we need to work together, recognizing each other's strengths? However, as in any family relationship, there were tensions. At one point, Miriam and Aaron questioned Moses' leadership, particularly regarding his foreign wife. This criticism was a delicate issue in their relationship because it challenged Moses' authority. This conflict, though brief, highlights the importance of maintaining humility even in the closest relationships. Sometimes, within our inner circles, we are tempted to question the leadership of others. But Miriam learned the hard way that leadership cannot be measured by family closeness, but by obedience to a higher calling. Yet, despite these challenges, the relationship among the three remained strong. After the incident, Moses interceded for Miriam, demonstrating that despite differences, Forgiveness is essential to maintain strong bonds. This episode teaches us the importance of resolving conflicts with humility and forgiving, especially those closest to us. When we look at the story, we see that leadership and faith are not free from flaws, but it is through forgiveness and reconciliation that relationships are strengthened. Miriam's criticism of Moses' leadership and its consequences. The moment when Miriam criticized Moses' leadership is one of the most dramatic episodes of her life. Along with Aaron, Miriam questioned her brother's authority, mainly regarding his marriage to an Ethiopian woman. This criticism, though seemingly trivial, revealed something deeper, a doubt about God's choice of Moses as the absolute leader. It was a breach of trust not only between siblings but also in the hierarchy established by God. Miriam, who had always demonstrated such faith and leadership, now found herself involved in a moment of weakness. And how many times in our own journeys do we find ourselves questioning decisions that seem beyond our understanding? The consequences of this criticism were severe. Miriam was struck with leprosy, a disease that isolated her from the rest of the community. This punishment was not just physical but also spiritual and emotional. For someone who led the women and was so respected, being cut off from her people was a devastating blow. This episode teaches us the importance of understanding the limits of leadership and recognizing that we don't always have all the answers. Miriam, in her criticism, momentarily forgot the value of obedience and faith in the larger plan. Isn't it the same in our lives? Sometimes we question what we don't understand, but the consequences can be more severe than we imagine. However, even in the midst of punishment, Moses' role as an intercessor was crucial. He prayed to God to heal his sister, demonstrating that even in the face of failure, forgiveness must prevail. Moses' leadership, marked by compassion, shows that a true leader does not hold grudges but seeks reconciliation. This act of intercession teaches us that even when we fail, there is always room for forgiveness, as long as we have the humility to acknowledge the mistake. Thus, we see that leadership and faith go hand in hand, and that even the greatest leaders are subject to human flaws. Miriam's punishment of leprosy and her healing through Moses' intercession. When Miriam was afflicted with leprosy, her condition isolated her from the people, symbolizing a rupture between her leadership and her community. Leprosy, in addition to being a physical disease, carried a symbolic weight of impurity and separation. Miriam, a woman who had always been at the forefront, guiding and leading, now found herself on the margins, exposed to her vulnerability. In this moment, Moses' leadership shone in an unexpected way. Instead of distancing himself from his sister or punishing her further, he interceded for her, asking God to heal her. This shows that true leadership is driven by faith and forgiveness, and that in moments of downfall, it is the support of others that can restore us. Miriam's healing did not come instantly, and this teaches us something fundamental. Forgiveness and healing are processes. Moses prayed, and God instructed that Miriam remain outside the camp for 7 days. This period of isolation was both a punishment and an opportunity for reflection. How many times in our own lives do we face moments of separation that force us to reflect on our actions? Miriam's story reminds us that even in the worst circumstances, there is always a chance for reconciliation and healing, as long as we are willing to learn from our mistakes and trust in the process of restoration. When Miriam was finally healed and reintegrated into the community, her leadership took on a new depth. She had gone through a moment of great humiliation and isolation, but was restored through faith and forgiveness. This episode shows us that true leadership is the one that rises even after falling. Miriam emerged from this period not only healed physically, but also spiritually renewed. Moses' intercession, the time of isolation, and the final healing reveal that the process of forgiveness and restoration is a journey that we all, at some point, need to walk. Miriam's spiritual and historical legacy in the Exodus and for the people of Israel. Miriam's legacy is one of the deepest within the context of the Exodus and the history of the people of Israel. Although she experienced moments of weakness, her leadership was essential in decisive moments, such as the song after the crossing of the Red Sea. Miriam stood out not only as a female leader in a patriarchal context, but also as a prophetess who guided the people in faith. Her role in the story of the Exodus was not secondary. She was one of the voices that led the Hebrews, especially the women, in their spiritual journey. This combination of faith, leadership, and humility is an example of how Miriam transformed her community. Miriam also left us a valuable example of the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. Her relationship with Moses and Aaron was tested, but in the end, she was restored and continued to be a figure of leadership. The fact that Moses interceded for her reinforces the idea that, in faith, there is no room for resentment. Miriam's legacy teaches us that spiritual leaders are not immune to failures, but it is through humility and obedience that they find redemption. And this is a legacy that endures to this day, that of a woman who, despite her failings, was always guided by her faith. Beyond her spiritual impact, Miriam left a deep historical legacy. Her leadership influenced generations of women and men who saw in her an example of how faith can move mountains, even in the most difficult moments. Miriam demonstrated that female leadership can be equally powerful and inspiring, breaking barriers that many believed were insurmountable. She showed that faith, leadership, and humility are the foundations of a life guided by God, and this teaching endures to this day, encouraging the viewer to apply the knowledge. And now, after everything you've heard about Miriam, I ask you, how many times have you hesitated to lead for fear of making mistakes? Miriam, with all her successes and failures, shows us that true leadership is not perfect. It's about learning, correcting, and above all, forgiving. So, what will you do with this knowledge? How can you apply these lessons to your life? Think about the areas where you can lead with faith, demonstrate humility, and practice forgiveness. And if this content made you reflect, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. There is still much to learn from the Bible stories, and I assure you that each one will bring you valuable lessons. See you in the next video. If you want to continue learning from these transformative stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll stay updated on each new teaching that can impact your life and your relationship with God. Let's continue this journey of faith together.